She collapsed before Pack from her weak heat and opened her eyes to Alpha King watching over her. The forest had grown quiet, save for the rustle of leaves and the faint, steady beat of a heart struggling to survive. Shadows stretched across the ground like fingers, pulling at the edges of the woman's consciousness. She stumbled, her legs trembling beneath her, the air thick with an almost tangible weight. Every breath was a labor, each step a battle she seemed destined to lose. Her hand pressed against her chest, feeling the uneven, faltering rhythm of her own heart. It had always been weak, though she had fought to ignore it, to hide it even from herself. She had thought she could run far enough, hide long enough, to escape the mark that had plagued her since birth. But now, as darkness wrapped itself around the forest like a cloak, she realized she could not outrun it any longer. A distant howl cut through the silence, sharp and commanding. Her ears strained to locate it, but the sound was not just noise. It was warning, demand, and curiosity all at once. Her pulse quickened, not from fear alone, but from the strange recognition that the voice belonged to something older, wiser, more powerful than anything she had ever encountered. She tried to step forward to push herself onward, but her legs buckled. The world tipped. Leaves blurred. The ground rushed up to meet her and she collapsed onto the damp earth. Her vision narrowed, her body trembling, and she felt the cold fingers of weakness curling around her very soul. She thought she was done. But then, a pair of eyes opened in the darkness. They were not human eyes, yet they held something deeply familiar, command, authority, and a strange, impossible tenderness. He was watching her, and though she did not know him, she felt the weight of his gaze in her bones. The sound of footsteps followed, slow, measured, powerful. He did not approach recklessly. Every movement was deliberate, as though the earth itself recognized him as its master. She wanted to speak, to cry out for help, but her lips would not move. "Stay still," a voice said, deep and steady, carrying the resonance of authority that made the wind itself pause. Her heart skipped a beat, not from fear, but from something more complicated, something she could not name. She felt small before him, fragile and exposed, yet part of her felt seen. He knelt beside her, his presence overwhelming yet protective. Even in the dim light she could see the sharp line of his jaw, the dark sweep of his hair, and the intensity of eyes that seemed to pierce through the world, through lies, through shadows, and into her very soul. "You are weak," he said, not as accusation, but as observation. There was no cruelty in his tone, only clarity. "Why are you here?" she tried to answer, but her voice was little more than a whisper lost to the night. Her chest rose and fell unevenly, and she feared it might stop altogether. The weakness in her heart was not simply physical, it was deeper, as if some invisible chain had been tightening for years. I don't know," she managed at last. Her words trembled and her hands shook as they grazed the earth. I needed to keep moving." He studied her for a long moment. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Then, slowly, he lifted her into his arms. Not roughly, not hurriedly, but with a strength and care that made her entire body instinctively relax, though her mind remained wary. She did not know him, yet there was a strange comfort in being held. The forest floor gave way to the den, a space unlike anything she had imagined. Shadows danced across the walls, lit by flickering torches that cast shapes like ancient spirits. The air smelled of earth, fur, and a faint, untamed power that thrummed beneath her skin. He laid her upon a fur-covered platform, watching her as she struggled to breathe steadily. Every shallow inhale seemed a victory, and he did not speak, did not move. He only observed, as if counting her breaths, measuring her strength against the weight of the night. "Who are you?" she asked again, her voice barely rising above a whisper. "I am the Alpha," he said finally, each word deliberate, like the strike of a bell in the quiet dark. "And you are not meant to be here." She blinked, confusion warring with the strange pull she felt toward him. I didn't know, Silence," he commanded softly. "Rest. Your strength will not return unless you let it." She wanted to protest, to insist that she could walk on her own, that she did not need the care of anyone, even him. But her body would not allow it. She felt the pulse in her chest, wild and erratic, threatening to overtake her senses. And then, as if sensing the danger, he laid a steady hand over hers, grounding her. Time stretched. The forest whispered outside. Her thoughts spun in disarray. Why him? Why now? She did not know if he would let her leave, if he would keep her here, or if he would judge her for the weakness she could not hide. Yet, despite the questions, despite the uncertainty, she found herself staring at him. And he, impossibly, stared back, not with anger, not with judgment, but with the intensity of a storm about to break, majestic, consuming, and terrifying in its beauty. "You have a mark," he said after a long silence. "It is old, dangerous. Why do you hide it?" She pressed her hands to her chest, feeling the faint, almost imperceptible scar beneath her skin. It had always been part of her, a silent reminder of a destiny she did not understand. I try not to think about it," she admitted, voice trembling. It makes me weak." He shook his head slightly, almost imperceptibly. "It is not weakness, not yet, but it could become so if left unchecked. You carry something ancient, something that can change the balance of all we know." Her eyes widened, a mixture of fear and curiosity rooting her to the spot. She did not understand, could not comprehend. How could a single pulse, a single mark on her heart hold such weight? "I don't understand," she whispered. "You will," he said, though his gaze remained fixed upon her. "In time." For a long while they sat in silence, the only sound the faint rustle of the forest and the distant calls of creatures neither fully human nor fully beast. It was a strange, unsettling calm, one that carried both warning and promise. Finally he spoke again. "You will stay here tonight. You are weak. The forest will not forgive another mistake." She wanted to resist, to insist on leaving, on moving, on running as she always had. But the fire in her chest had dimmed too far. She could not fight. And when he offered her a blanket, the warmth brushing against her skin felt like the first true comfort she had known in years. Her eyelids grew heavy. She did not fight the pull of sleep, though the darkness carried with it strange, flickering visions. She saw shadows of a pack she did not yet belong to, of forests older than time, of power and danger intertwined. She felt herself trembling, not entirely from fear, but from something deep inside that was awakening. And then, just before she drifted into unconsciousness, she saw him clearly. The Alpha King, standing watch, his eyes never leaving her. Something about his gaze anchored her to the moment, even as the pulse in her chest threatened to pull her away. For the first time in years, she felt the strange mixture of fear, awe, and longing. She did not know him. She did not trust him. And yet she felt seen, as though her weakness and her hidden power alike were acknowledged, recognized, and waited upon. The forest outside hummed with life, the darkness thick and alive. Somewhere beyond the trees, the wind carried whispers she could not understand. Somewhere beyond her own frail heart, a story was beginning, one of power, of choice, and of consequences that would not be ignored. And in that moment, as her eyes closed, she felt it, the pulse of her heart, wild and unsteady, resonating with something older, stronger, and utterly inescapable. She did not know it yet, but the night had only just begun. The first light of dawn filtered through the thick canopy, casting streaks of gold across the Alpha King's den. The woman stirred, her eyelids fluttering open to find him still watching over her. He sat across from her, silent, every line of his posture rigid with control, yet his eyes betrayed the tension of a mind that refused to rest. She blinked, the memory of last night rushing back, the forest, her collapse, the wild pulse of her heart, and the shock in his gaze. For a moment, she feared she had overstepped some boundary simply by surviving. But then, she noticed the way he had arranged the blankets around her, the care in the simple act, and something warm and unexpected stirred within her chest. "You are awake," he said, his voice as calm as a river, yet carrying an undercurrent of command that made her pause. "Good. The forest will test you if you remain weak." I am stronger than I look," she whispered, though even she knew it was half-truth and half-hope. She tried to sit up, but her muscles protested, weak from exhaustion and the lingering effect of her pulse. He stood and came to her side, lifting her again as if she weighed nothing at all. She realized in that moment that strength was not merely physical, it was also in control, in the command he wielded effortlessly, and in the calm he carried even when danger lingered like a shadow behind his eyes. "You will eat," he said, placing a bowl of warm stew before her. "You need your strength if you are to survive in my world." She hesitated. The aroma of the food was comforting, but she had spent so long hiding that even simple kindness felt strange. She reached for the bowl with trembling hands, and he watched her silent, as if waiting to measure every breath, every heartbeat. As she ate, she dared to glance at him. The Alpha King was a study in contrasts, stern yet protective, imposing yet attentive, dangerous yet watchful. She could feel the pulse in her chest responding to him, not in fear but in a strange rhythm that mimicked his presence. It startled her, though she did not yet understand why. "You are not like the others," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. "You carry something different, a presence that the forest itself recognizes. Why do you run from it?" She lowered her gaze, unable to answer. She had spent her life hiding from this truth, from the mark on her heart, and now she felt its weight in every beat, in every tremor. "I do not know," she murmured. "I have tried to ignore it." He knelt before her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. His gaze was unwavering. "Ignoring it will not save you. You must learn to control it, or it will control you." She looked at him, startled. Control. She had spent her life fearing that her weakness would destroy her. Could she really learn to harness it? Could she trust him enough to try? The forest outside seemed to respond to the tension in the room. Leaves rustled softly, though no wind stirred. Somewhere deep in the shadows, a distant howl echoed, not the Alpha's, not his pack, but something older, stranger, watching, waiting. The woman shivered, not from cold but from the realization that she was no longer alone in her struggles. The forest, the Alpha, and whatever force lingered in the shadows were now part of the same web, and she was at its center. "You must rest," the Alpha said, rising. "The forest does not forgive weakness." She tried to rise, but her legs faltered, and she sank back onto the furs. He reached out, steadying her with a hand on her shoulder. "Do not fight it," he instructed. "You are not ready." For the first time, she felt the weight of her vulnerability as not just danger but possibility. She had spent years fleeing, hiding, resisting, but here, in his presence, she could feel the faintest glimmer of trust. Not trust in others, not yet, but in herself. Days passed. She remained in the Alpha's den, under his watchful eyes, slowly regaining strength. She learned the rhythm of the pack, how they moved, how they communicated, how the Alpha's word was law and yet also a shield. She witnessed their loyalty, their discipline, and their reverence for the Alpha. And in quiet moments, she saw the cracks in their leader, moments when his mask of invincibility slipped, revealing glimpses of loneliness, of weariness, and of the burden he carried for all of them. They spoke little of emotion. Words were scarce, but glances, gestures, and shared silences spoke volumes. She began to notice the subtle shifts, how he relaxed when she spoke, how his gaze lingered just a fraction longer than necessary, how he seemed unsettled by her presence. And she in turn found her pulse responding to him, not in fear, but in anticipation, curiosity, and a strange, inexplicable longing. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, painting the forest in streaks of fire and shadow, she ventured out of the den under his supervision. The Alpha walked beside her, his presence commanding yet protective. She felt the forest breathing around them, alive with unseen forces, yet she felt safer with him than she had in years. "You are stronger than you believe," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper as they moved through the trees. But the strength you carry is not just yours, it is tied to the forest, to your heart, and to the pack. She stopped, turning to look at him. Tied how? I do not understand. He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. One day you will. For now, know that running from it will not help. You must face it, or it will consume you. They walked in silence after that, the tension between them growing heavier with every step. She felt it in her chest, in the wild pulse that seemed to respond to his nearness. She wanted to pull away, to hide again, but something in him, his unwavering gaze, his silent strength, made it impossible. That night, as she lay on the furs, sleep elusive, she felt it again, the pulse in her heart, stronger, wilder, almost calling to him. And she realized with a mixture of fear and wonder that he felt it too. She could see it in the way his jaw tightened, the way his dark eyes lingered on her even when she thought he was looking elsewhere. The connection terrified her. It was not love, not yet, but it was something deep, ancient, binding, and utterly inescapable. She did not know what it meant, only that she could not ignore it. As midnight approached, a distant howl shattered the quiet, sending shivers down her spine. The alpha rose immediately, every muscle tensed, every sense alert. He moved to the doorway of the den, scanning the shadows, listening. She tried to rise, to follow, but her legs faltered. He turned, his eyes locking on hers. "Stay," he commanded. "Do not move until I return." Fear and frustration warred within her, but she obeyed. She could only watch as he disappeared into the darkness, the weight of his presence lingering even in his absence. Minutes stretched like hours. She could hear her own heartbeat, irregular and fast, mingling with the pulse that had always set her apart. It was as if the forest itself had slowed, waiting, watching. And then faintly she sensed it, something shifting, something ancient, something that had noticed her awakening strength and the bond forming between her and the alpha. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying a scent of danger and promise alike. Somewhere in the forest, eyes watched, calculating, waiting for the moment to strike. And she realized with a cold clarity, she was no longer just a weak woman hiding from her destiny. She was part of something larger, something older, and the alpha, he was tied to her fate in ways neither of them yet understood. By the time he returned, she was trembling, not from fear alone, but from the weight of what was coming. His eyes softened slightly as he looked at her, but the shadow of concern never left them. "You must be ready," he said simply, almost to himself. "The forest does not forgive hesitation." She nodded, though she did not yet understand what readiness meant. She only knew that she would follow him, that she would trust him, and that she could no longer run from the pulse in her chest, from the strength that lay hidden within her, or from the connection that bound her to the Alpha King in ways she could not yet name. And as she closed her eyes, exhausted but awake in a new way, she sensed the forest holding its breath, waiting, watching, as if the night itself had shifted, and the story of her fate and his was only beginning. The forest was no longer just a place of refuge. Its shadows had grown longer, thicker, curling around the trees like living things. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig seemed louder, sharper, as if the forest itself were warning of something approaching. The woman had felt it for days, a restless stirring within the land, a tension in the air that pressed against her chest as heavily as her own pulse. She rose from the furs in the den, stretching limbs still stiff from weeks of weakness. Even now, after days of rest under the Alpha King's watchful gaze, she felt the lingering tremor in her heart, the strange rhythm that seemed to react to the world around her. Every sound, every shadow seemed amplified. It frightened her, yet there was a pull, a curiosity she could not resist. The Alpha King stood nearby, observing her quietly. His presence was calm but commanding, a constant reminder of strength and control she did not yet fully understand. He had begun to trust her just slightly, but the weight of responsibility he carried for his pack and the forest kept him ever vigilant. You sense it, do you not? He asked, his voice low, deliberate. The forest shifts around you. It knows more than we do. She nodded, though her chest fluttered nervously. Yes, it feels alive, watching, waiting. He studied her, his eyes dark and calculating. That is not fear, he said. That is awakening. The pulse in your heart is growing stronger. If you do not learn to control it, it will control you, and the consequences will not be small. She swallowed, a lump forming in her throat. She had lived her life hiding, running from a weakness she could never escape. Now she realized it was not weakness at all, but power, power she could not yet understand. And with power came responsibility, danger, and a connection she had not asked for. The Alpha King moved closer, standing beside her. She felt the heat radiating from him, the quiet strength that seemed to anchor the world itself. And yet, with that closeness, she felt her pulse respond, not in fear but in a rhythm that matched his presence. She could not explain it. She could not fight it. You must face the truth, he said. Your past, your bloodline, it is tied to something older than this forest, older than the pack. You cannot escape it forever. She shook her head, trying to fight the growing anxiety. I do not remember much, only fragments. Faces I cannot name, places I cannot place. And the mark, it has always been with me, but I do not understand it. He regarded her silently for a moment, then placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. Memory is only part of the truth. The pulse in your heart is part of you, but it is also part of something greater, and it has chosen to awaken now because the darkness is coming, and it has noticed you. Her stomach tightened. She had felt the shadows pressing in for days, the strange whispers in the wind, the faint glow of eyes in the night, the sense of being watched by forces unseen. And now, with his words, she understood. The danger was no longer distant. It had arrived, drawn by her presence, her awakening power, and the strange bond forming between her and the Alpha King. The days that followed were a tense routine of training, observation, and quiet discovery. The Alpha King taught her control, not of her body, which was still fragile, but of her pulse, her senses, her awareness of the world around her. He guided her through the forest, showing her how to move silently, how to anticipate danger, how to read the subtle signals in the wind and the earth. You feel too much, he warned one afternoon as they walked along a narrow path between ancient oaks. Your heart hears more than your eyes. That is a gift, but also a curse. Learn to direct it or it will overwhelm you. She nodded, determination flaring in her chest despite the lingering fear. I will try, she said, her voice steady, though her pulse fluttered erratically. He studied her for a moment, then allowed a faint, almost imperceptible nod. Good. You will need every ounce of control soon. The shadows are coming and they will test you. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, casting the forest in hues of orange and purple, the woman felt a strange calm in the Alpha King's presence. They had been walking for hours, practicing control and awareness, and though her body was exhausted, her mind felt sharper. For the first time, she sensed her own strength, not physical, not just her pulse, but an inner clarity she had never known. Yet danger was never far. The forest's whispers grew louder at night, carrying strange scents and sounds. The Alpha King was vigilant, patrolling the perimeter with his senses tuned to every movement. She watched him, noting the careful way he measured every sound, every shadow, and she began to understand the depth of his responsibility, not just for her, but for every member of his pack. You cannot ignore the bond forming between us, he said one night as they sat near the fire, the flickering flames casting shadows across his face. His voice was soft, almost private, though it carried the weight of command. It is not choice, it is instinct. You feel it. I feel it. Denying it will only make what is coming harder to face. Her heart skipped a beat and she looked down, feeling the warmth of his gaze even without seeing it. I do not know if I can trust it, she admitted, her voice barely audible over the crackle of the fire. I have never felt anything like this before." He leaned closer, not threatening, not imposing, but steadying. "Then you must learn," he said. "Trust the pulse, trust what it tells you, and trust me. If you do not, the shadows will consume you, and they will not stop at you alone." The woman shivered, not from fear, but from the intensity of his words, from the undeniable truth in them. The bond between them was growing, subtle, powerful, and undeniable. And with it came both the possibility of safety and the certainty of danger. Days turned into nights, and nights into long, tense watches in the forest. One evening, the Alpha King led her to a clearing, the moonlight spilling over the grass like silver water. He watched her carefully as she closed her eyes and reached for the pulse in her heart, feeling it respond to the world around her. "You are ready," he said quietly, "but you will face trials soon that cannot be controlled. Darkness does not wait for preparation." Her eyes snapped open. What is coming?" He shook his head slowly, his eyes dark. "Something old, something that has been waiting for your pulse to awaken. It has noticed you, and it will test both of us. Your control, your trust, your bond with me, all will be challenged. And if we fail—" He left the sentence unfinished, but she understood. The consequences would be devastating. The next night the shadows arrived. It started with a whisper in the wind, subtle at first, almost gentle. But the forest grew restless, leaves twisting unnaturally, branches stretching toward the sky as though reaching for something unseen. Her pulse began to race, erratic and wild, responding to the presence of a force she could neither see nor name. The Alpha King moved instantly, his senses alert, his body tense and ready. He placed a firm hand on her arm. "Do not falter," he commanded. "Trust the bond, trust your pulse, and trust me." She nodded, though terror gripped her heart. She felt the shadows pressing closer, felt their weight in her chest, felt the pulse in her heart flare uncontrollably. And yet, amidst the fear, there was a strange clarity. She could sense their presence, anticipate their movements, and feel the rhythm of the Alpha's own strength beside her. The shadows emerged, not fully formed but in glimpses, figures slipping between trees, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. The forest seemed to respond to their presence, every branch and leaf shifting unnaturally. The woman's pulse surged, wild and bright, warning of the danger, guiding her movements, linking her instincts to the Alpha King's own commands. He moved beside her like a shadow of his own, every motion precise, every decision calculated. She followed his lead, learning to trust not just him, but the strange rhythm that connected them, the pulse in her heart echoing his strength, amplifying it, making them a force together. The night stretched into a battle of perception and will. She did not strike. She did not fight in the conventional sense. But her pulse guided, warned, and protected, weaving an invisible thread that kept them ahead of the unseen forces pressing in. By the time the first light of dawn broke through the canopy, the shadows had receded, leaving the forest silent once more. The woman sank to the ground, exhausted, trembling, and yet alive. The Alpha King knelt beside her, his eyes soft, almost tender. "You survived," he said quietly, "but the trial is only beginning. The shadows will return stronger, smarter, and hungrier, and next time we may not be so lucky." She looked at him, fear and wonder mingling in her gaze. I felt it. I felt you. I felt the bond. It helped me." He reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "Then you understand," he said softly. "We are stronger together, and we must remain so, for the darkness is patient, and it has been waiting for you." Her chest fluttered, the pulse in her heart slowing but still vibrant. She realized in that quiet moment that her life had changed forever. She was no longer weak, no longer alone, and no longer able to hide from the destiny that had been calling her for years. But she also understood that the path ahead would not be easy. Trust, control, and the bond she shared with the Alpha King would be tested again, and the shadows were only the beginning. The forest was alive with shadows, darker, and heavier than anything the woman had felt before. The wind whispered through the trees like voices from another time, and the pulse in her heart throbbed in warning and anticipation. She stood beside the Alpha King, the weight of what was to come pressing down on them both. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice steady but carrying an edge of tension. He had never sounded uncertain, yet now, with the darkness gathering around them, there was a hint of doubt in his tone. She drew a shaky breath, her chest rising and falling with the erratic rhythm of her pulse. "I think I am," she whispered. "I know I have to try." He nodded, and together they stepped into the heart of the forest, where the shadows had thickened into a wall of shifting forms. Here the air seemed heavier, almost alive, and the trees themselves appeared to bend as if acknowledging the presence of something ancient and powerful. "You feel it," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "The force that has been waiting, it has been patient." Too patient. Her pulse surged in response. She could feel the forest itself, could sense the rhythm of life and shadow intertwining around them. She felt connected, not just to the land or the Alpha King, but to something deeper, older, something that had been stirring long before she was born. The first shadow moved without warning, a dark figure slipping between the trees. She did not flinch. Instead, she felt the pulse in her heart align with the Alpha's movements, guiding them through the forest, predicting the shadow's shifts and strikes. "Stay close," he said, his hand brushing against hers briefly. That touch was grounding, reassuring, and her pulse responded instinctively. She had never felt anything like this, fear mingled with connection, tension with trust, uncertainty with an unexpected surge of strength. The shadows advanced, but neither she nor the Alpha King faltered. He moved like a force of nature, precise and controlled, while she followed, letting the pulse in her chest guide them both. It was not strength of muscle alone that saved them. It was unity, awareness, and the unspoken bond they had formed over weeks of trials, lessons, and shared vulnerability. "You have grown," he said between movements, his eyes never leaving the path ahead. "Your pulse is strong now, stronger than I expected." She nodded, her own focus sharp. I feel it. I feel the rhythm and I feel you. Together, we can face this." The shadows recoiled slightly at their combined presence, as if recognizing the force in their unity. But the darkness was patient. It had been waiting for her awakening, and it would not retreat easily. Then the largest shadow emerged, a towering figure darker than night, its form shifting and impossible to define. The pulse in her chest reacted violently, almost threatening to overwhelm her senses. The Alpha King tightened his grip on her hand, anchoring her. "Trust me," he said, his voice firm. "Trust the bond. You will not face this alone." She drew a deep breath and let herself be guided, letting the pulse in her heart expand and reach out. Energy flowed from her, subtle at first, like ripples in water, then growing stronger, linking with the Alpha's own presence. Together, they became a force that the shadows could not ignore. The largest shadow lashed out, but their combined rhythm countered it, bending the darkness back, weakening it with every coordinated step. The forest itself seemed to respond, branches twisting to shield them, roots rising to hinder the enemy. The woman's pulse, once a source of fear, now became a beacon of power, guiding them both through the chaos. The Alpha King's eyes met hers in the midst of the battle. "You are more than you realize," he said, and she felt his confidence flow into her, steadying the chaos inside her chest. For a long moment, the world narrowed to the rhythm between them. The pulse of her heart, the command of his presence, the whisper of the forest, and the retreat of shadows. And then, as if recognizing defeat, the darkness began to collapse inward, dissolving into the air like mist at sunrise. When the last shadow faded, silence returned to the forest. The first rays of sunlight broke through the canopy, spilling gold and silver across the ground. Birds began to sing, timidly at first, then boldly, as if the world itself celebrated their survival. The woman sank to her knees, her chest heaving, sweat and tears mixing on her face. The Alpha King knelt beside her, placing a steady hand on her shoulder, grounding her even as her pulse slowly returned to a calmer rhythm. "You did it," he said quietly. "We did it." She looked up at him, uncertainty and awe mingling in her gaze. I could not have done it alone." "No," he admitted softly, "but you did not face it alone either. That is what makes us strong. That is what makes you strong." For the first time, she allowed herself to truly look at him, not just as the Alpha King, not just as the commander of the forest and the pack, but as the man who had guided her, protected her, and shared in her fear. She saw his strength, his loneliness, and the burden he carried for all those who depended on him. And she saw something else, something unspoken, something powerful: trust, care, and perhaps even longing. The wind shifted, carrying with it a scent of freedom and renewal. The pulse in her chest, once erratic and wild, now beat steady, aligned with her own confidence and the presence of the Alpha beside her. She felt changed, transformed, not just by the trial, not just by the shadows, but by the connection they had forged, tested under fire and proven unbreakable. The Alpha King helped her to her feet. Together they walked through the clearing, the sunlight washing over them like a promise. The forest, once a place of darkness and fear, now seemed to recognize them as guardians, alive with energy and life. "You have embraced it," he said quietly. "The pulse, the power, the bond. You are no longer the woman who collapsed in the forest." "I am different," she admitted. "Because of you, and because of this forest, and because I could not run anymore." He studied her, and for a brief moment his usual control softened into something tender. "You trusted me," he said simply, "and in doing so you trusted yourself. That is the greatest strength anyone can have." She looked down, feeling the warmth of his presence and the lingering rhythm of her own heartbeat. I trust you," she said, voice low but certain, "and I trust the bond we share." He reached out, gently taking her hand in both of his. "Then we face the world together," he said, and in that gesture the bond was sealed, not just by survival but by mutual trust, understanding, and the recognition of strength in both of them. They returned to the den, where the pack awaited in silence. The members regarded her with newfound respect, sensing the change in her, feeling the pulse that had once been a source of fear now aligned with the forest and the Alpha King. Even the Alpha's closest warriors, silent and watchful, acknowledged her presence with quiet nods. That night, as she lay on the furs, the fire casting golden light over her face, she realized that the fear she had carried for so long was gone, not replaced entirely, but transformed into something productive, something alive. She had faced shadows, survived trials, and discovered the strength within her pulse, her heart, and her trust. The Alpha King remained near, watching, guarding, and sharing in the quiet victory. She felt his presence like a heartbeat beside her own, steady, grounding, protective. And in that closeness, she allowed herself to feel hope, courage, and an unspoken connection that had grown from fear and necessity into trust and partnership. The forest outside whispered softly, as if congratulating them, as if acknowledging the bond that had been forged in darkness and tempered by trial. And though the journey was far from over, though challenges would arise, she knew one truth: she was no longer alone, and she was no longer weak. Her pulse was steady now, strong and unwavering. And it carried not just life, but purpose, connection, and the promise of transformation for herself, for the Alpha King, and for the forest they were now bound to protect. The first rays of sunrise spilled over the trees, lighting the clearing in gold. She opened her eyes to the Alpha King watching over her, a silent promise in his gaze. The shadows had been defeated, for now, but their story, their bond, and their journey had only truly begun.